in a world where, the amount of information that's just thrown at us every single day is, well, it's essentially infinite, we're faced with this crucial and honestly pretty exhausting choice.
It's a constant choice, isn't it?
It is, and it's always there. It's the choice between comfort and clarity.
Hmm.
Do you go down the path of least resistance, the endless scroll, the punchy headline, the emotional vibe of a story?
The entertainment loop.
Exactly, the loop. Or do you pick the harder path, the raw data, the regulatory filing, the fine print, the tedious, frankly unsexy truth that takes real mental effort to get through?
Yeah, and most people, I think, they confuse staying informed with just staying stimulated.
That's it. That's the perfect way to put it. They feel productive because their attention is busy, right? But they're often just, surfing the surface.
Right. But the real decisions, the ones that actually change things.
The big ones, yeah. The ones that change a company, an industry, or even your own financial security, they rely completely on the quality of your inputs, not the strength of your immediate impressions.
And that's really what we're digging into today.
That is our mission. We are leveraging the unsexy input. We've pulled together sources from decades of business and even 2 centuries of history to show how focusing your limited attention on the boring, primary, high-density stuff, well, it gives you an almost unfair advantage.
It really does.
We've got 4 incredible high-leverage strategies we're going to unpack. We're going to look at Bill Gates's isolated think week and how he processed this just avalanche of reading to declare the internet a tidal wave. We'll deep dive into Michael Burry sitting alone in an office reading hundreds of pages of legal filings while, the entire financial market was out partying.
A very different kind of part.
A very different kind. We'll look at Frederick Douglass's strategic brilliance in bartering bread for knowledge. And finally, we'll explore the cultural revolution Alan Mulally started at Ford by Kreber. Get this. Simply clapping for bad news.
It sounds so simple, but it's profound.
It is. And these aren't just, charming little anecdotes. They are recipes for how choosing the boring document over the exciting narrative fundamentally changes outcomes.
And what's so fascinating here is how universal this principle is. We're living in this moment where focused attention is, it's the most valuable form of capital there is.
Without a doubt.
And most people are just renting theirs out cheaply for little dopamine hits. The strategic advantage in really any field comes from doing the mental equivalent of, I love this phrase, counting the bolts on a bridge while everyone else admired the paint.
Ooh, I like that. It's that refusal to be distracted by the superficial polish.
Precisely. And we've distilled this advantage down to 4 core disciplines we're going to explore. These stories show us that isolation, rigorous verification, leveraging micro-attention, and cultural honesty. They're all just versions of the same deep commitment.
Or refusal to live on the surface of reality.
That's it. It's about buying your attention back and investing it where it actually compounds. The cost of ignorance, as we're about to see, is always paid in strategy and time.
Okay, let's start with what is arguably the most famous productivity ritual in modern business history, Bill Gates's Think Week.
Right.
When you think of a CEO driving massive strategic change, you picture constant motion, high-stakes meetings, relentless travel. And Gates did all that, of course.
Of course.
But he punctuated that noise with this intentional, almost aggressive stillness.
And it's the stillness that makes it work. Our sources describe the setup perfectly. Gates runs this 7-day stretch of total seclusion twice a year.
Twice a year.
And it's usually in a deliberately unglamorous setting, often a secluded waterfront cottage somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, specifically chosen because it's hard to get to and free from distraction. This is not a spa retreat.
No.
It's a forced march through information.
I love that phrase, aggressively unglamorous, because the goal isn't to relax, right? It's to force intellectual friction. We're talking about a man running the biggest software company in the world, yet when he went to Think Week, he wasn't checking email or jumping on video calls.
No, he was processing physical paper.
Physical paper.
And that is the absolutely crucial mechanical detail. The whole week runs on paper. The entire company is instructed to submit these long, in-depth technical memos, strategic proposals, and raw, unedited trend analyses.
So this is the primary stuff.
This is the primary artifact from the engineers and the product managers who are closest to the technology. Gates starts his mornings reading in bed. Sometimes he'd skip meals, and he'd spend up to 18 hours a day just processing this volume.
Let's focus on the sheer quantity for a second. By the midpoint of one of these retreats, he had already read 56 papers. His personal record was 112 papers in a 7-day stretch.
Just think about that.
That is an enormous density of raw intellectual input. We're not talking about, executive summaries or some curated slide deck. These are deep technical dives into subjects like operating system architecture or server deployment strategies.
Or early mobile computing challenges, yeah.
Right, the really nitty-gritty stuff.
And that density is the entire point. When you are operating at the scale of a company like Microsoft, your strategy has to be informed by the foundational substrate of the technology, not just the surface-level market chatter you hear on TV.
That makes sense.
Reading 112 papers forces you past the PR spin and all the political smoothing that happens inside a big company. You are directly confronting the unfiltered reality of your engineering problems and your market opportunities.
Oh, hey, but hang on. How do we know this isn't just intellectual vanity? I mean, if Gates is just locked away reading only internal papers from Microsoft employees, how does he not just create an echo chamber? How does he prevent that isolation from becoming, a feedback loop of Microsoft's own fiction?
That is a great critical question, and the answer is really in the process of annotation and the variety of the submissions.
Okay.
First, the isolation is designed to eliminate the external noise, the pundits, the media, the competitors' press releases. By taking all that away, he maximizes the signal from his own organization, but that signal is still raw.
It's unfiltered.
Exactly. And second, he uses these primary documents not as instruction, but as a mechanism for generating hard questions.
Yeah.
He would write pages and pages of margin notes, asking things like, what assumptions are baked into this? What decision does this force us to make?
So he's weaponizing his isolation. He's not just reading, he's conducting this rigorous cross-examination of his own internal knowledge base.
Precisely. A think week is a weaponized choice.
Yeah.
It's information over noise, inputs over impressions, primary material over comforting vibes.
Right.
Most executives operate in this attention economy where staying informed really just means staying stimulated. Constant meetings, quick summaries, punditry, that all feels productive because it's full of motion.
It feels like work.
Right. But it often leads to low-leverage, late decisions. Gates knew that shallow information costs billions of dollars in his world.
And nothing demonstrates the cost of being late or the strategic power of the Think Week better than that 1995 Internet tidal wave memo.
Yeah, this is the big one.
At that time, Microsoft was the dominant force. They were selling Windows 95, which was a massive success. They were, in the words of one source, winning yesterday's game while a new field, the Internet, was being built next door.
And the initial instinct, which is such a common psychological trap for any incumbent, was to just dismiss it. The Internet was slow, it was clunky, it was mostly a research tool.
Why bother?
Why would you shift focus from the insanely profitable desktop operating system? Gates had been reading internal memos about TCP/IP and browser tech for years, but he hadn't yet grasped the existential shift in the whole substrate of computing.
He describes going through several stages before increasing his view of the Internet's importance. The memo wasn't written on a whim. It was the distillation of reading literally hundreds of internal and external papers, which finally led to this undeniable conclusion.
The Internet wasn't just another application.
No, it was the entire platform.
The resulting memo, which he titled like an alarm bell, forced the company to look at facts it wanted to ignore because those facts threatened their most profitable business lines.
And the most significant line in it was so simple and decisive. He wrote, "Now I assign the Internet the highest level of importance. This means we must move quickly and aggressively to integrate the Internet into everything we do."
The power of that declaration wasn't the prediction itself. I mean, Netscape was already out there proving the browser model worked.
Right.
The power was the immediate, violent, strategic reallocation of attention and resources it forced across thousands of employees. It meant killing projects, delaying profitable updates, and redirecting entire engineering divisions toward the web. It proved the existential cost of being even a few years late.
It comes back to that distinction you made. Entertainment optimizes for engagement. It makes you feel comfortable and busy. Real information optimizes for accuracy, forcing you to confront uncomfortable facts.
And strategy requires accuracy. By forcing that deep reading and isolation, Gates made sure Microsoft was driven by accurate inputs, rather than the internal comfort of its own success story.
So, okay, let's make this actionable for everyone listening. How do we, who are not running Microsoft, apply this isolation strategy? The core takeaway seems to be that scarcity drives insight.
Absolutely. The hidden advantage here is just simple scarcity. Very few people will read what's boring long enough to actually change their strategy.
So first, there's the paper pile rule. Schedule a block of time, say 4 hours a month, and dedicate it to primary input only. You need to collect, I don't know, 8 to 12 pieces of raw source material.
Not articles about a company's earnings.
No, the full earnings call transcript. Not some punditry about a new regulation, but the actual regulatory guidance note. You're building your own archive of truth. You're cutting out the middlemen.
And when you engage with that material, you have to annotate like a manager, not like a passive student. You're not just highlighting, you're interrogating it.
You're asking questions.
Write margin notes, asking tough questions. What does this change about my assumptions? What decision does this force me to make about my career or my business? Because if the information doesn't force a decision, it's just low-leverage noise.
And the final crucial step is the output. After that deep block of work, you have to translate the knowledge into strategy. Write a single-page directive titled, "If this is true, then we must."
I love that.
Then you list 3 new priorities you must start, 3 things you have to kill or stop doing based on the new facts, and 3 strategic bets you must make. This turns passive learning into real, actionable power.
Information only compounds fastest when it meets resistance, and that resistance is usually your own comfortable assumptions. The directive is stark. If you don't intentionally schedule deep thinking, you will be scheduled by whatever's entertaining, and that delay is expensive.
Okay, so we've moved from the high-tech, isolated forests of the Pacific Northwest to the financial jungle of early 2004, specifically some obscure office in San Jose, California.
A very different scene.
Very different. Our next case study focuses on Michael Burry, the subject of The Big Short, and the extraordinary power of reading what the entire world dismissed as just mind-numbingly tedious.
Right. So the financial world in 2004 was in a total fever. Wall Street was celebrating the endless profitability of the housing market. They were convinced that prices only went up, and they were protected by all these layers of sophisticated financial engineering.
And meanwhile, Michael Burry is just sitting alone in his office. He wasn't reading the headlines or the CNBC chatter or the market rumors. He was reading financial filings.
His obsession was solitary and just mechanical. He wanted to understand how subprime mortgage bonds actually work rather than just trusting how they were rated.
And to really get the scale of complexity here, you have to understand the securitization machinery.
Well, you do. Investment banks were bundling thousands of individual high-risk home loans together and then packaging them into these massive financial products called collateralized debt obligations, or CDOs.
For anyone who hasn't deep dived into this, you can think of a CDO like a financial lasagna or maybe a tower.
A tower is a great analogy.
The interest and principal payments from thousands of mortgages flow into the base of the tower, and this cash flow is then sliced into different layers, or tranches, and sold off to different investors.
Exactly. The top layers, the senior tranches, were seen as the safest. They got paid first, and so they received the highest ratings, AAA, but they offered the lowest interest.
And the bottom layers?
The bottom layers, or the equity tranches, were riskier. They got paid last, but they offered much higher returns.
Yeah.
Investors would typically just trust the rating agencies, pick their layer, and move on. The whole market was built on the confidence that the agencies knew what they were doing and that the pool of loans was diverse enough to weather any localized defaults.
But Burry didn't trust the ratings.
Not at all.
He went to the source most people treated like, background noise. The source that was mandatory but universally ignored, the prospectus. The source material notes that each mortgage bond came with this mind-numbingly tedious prospectus, often running around 130 dense pages of legal jargon and footnotes.
And that's where the truth lived. If you actually read the fine print, you realize each bond wasn't just a product. It was practically a tiny, self-governing corporation with its own specific built-in failure modes.
And he was the only one reading it.
Burry was convinced, correctly, that he was virtually the only non-lawyer reading them end to end. And this willingness to pay attention longer than everyone else became his unassailable strategic advantage. It was his moat of boredom.
So as he's working through these documents, the story inside the paper starts to diverge violently from the story being sold outside.
Completely. The numbers inside the legal filings showed lending standards declining to the absolute bottom of the barrel. He saw loans being included, these toxic products with names like interest-only and critically negative amortizing adjustable rate subprime mortgages.
Let's pause on that term, negative amortizing, because it's so key to understanding the delayed fuse he spotted.
It's everything.
In a normal mortgage, your payment covers the interest and it reduces the principal. You amortize the loan.
But in a negative amortizing loan, the teaser payment is so low that it doesn't even cover the interest that's due. The unpaid interest is then added back to the principal, which means the size of the loan actually grows over time, even while the borrower is making payments.
So the borrower is paying every month, but they are sinking deeper and deeper into debt. This is just,
Yeah.
it's fundamentally engineered fragility. It's a ticking time bomb.
Absolutely. And Burry realized the true scandal wasn't that borrowers took these deals. That's just human desperation meeting opportunity. The real scandal was that lenders kept making them.
Why? What was the incentive?
He quickly understood the incentive structure. They weren't behaving like long-term lenders who cared if the loans paid off. They were behaving like production factories, just churning out paper that was instantly sold off to the Wall Street securitization machine. Risk was being transferred away from the originator almost instantly.
And the clock became audible to Burry because the fine print detailed the reset dates.
Diffuse.
Exactly. The low teaser rates on these toxic loans would only last for 2 or 3 years before they would jump drastically, sometimes doubling the monthly payment. Defaults wouldn't spike immediately, but they were mathematically certain to spike once those reset dates hit. He had found the delayed fuse.
Which leads us to the critical pivot point. Burry realized he couldn't just understand the fine print. He had to act on it in a contrarian way, betting against the entire housing market. Well, it required a new financial product because nobody else believed him.
He had to force the creation of the credit default swap, the CDS. Now, the credit default swap, again, it sounds complex, but it was essentially just insurance. Burry was betting that specific mortgage bonds would fail.
That's right. Think of it this way. A CDS is like buying fire insurance on a house you think is definitely going to burn down. Wall Street, who was convinced the house was fireproof, was happy to sell him the insurance policy for cheap premiums.
Because to them, it was free money.
It was free money. And it was the only way for him to profit from the insight he gained purely by reading the primary documents. He was betting massive sums against the collective narrative, solely based on what the fine print confessed about reality.
The principle here is just undeniable. Burry chose the source document over the story. Entertainment in the markets takes the form of groupthink, trust in performance, trusting those comfortable ratings, and the thrill of fast surface-level trading.
Right. And all those signals optimize for engagement and speed, not for accuracy. They are fundamentally late signals.
The fine print is where incentives confess their truth. Reality hides in the boring details, the filings, the footnotes, the contract terms, because the psychological effort it takes to cross that moat of boredom is just too high for most people.
And Burry didn't have special government access or anything. The documents were public. His advantage was purely behavioral, the willingness to do the unsexy homework, regardless of the noise outside his door.
So how do we apply this precision strategy? When we're evaluating a new industry or a new job contract or a critical vendor,
We have to consciously climb what we're calling the source ladder. For any major claim you encounter, whether it's about a stock's valuation or a new policy's impact, never stop at the commentary. You have to step down until you hit the original raw terms.
so you go from the headline?
Down to the news article, which references the analyst report, which interprets the financial filing, which is governed by the raw contract terms or the primary data. The further down you go, the higher your accuracy and the more unique your insight is going to be.
And we need to implement the fine print hour.
Yes. Schedule a non-negotiable block of time weekly to read one primary artifact end-to-end. A 10K filing, a regulatory guidance note, a full contract template. You're just calibrating your sense of reality against the documented truth.
As you're reading, you should be actively searching for those delayed fuses, just like Burry tracked those teaser rate resets.
What are the built-in lags or traps in your field? Quarterly renewal cycles, multi-year regulatory implementation deadlines, cash runways, customer churn cohorts. When is the information you already have scheduled to become a reality the market or your competitors have to confront?
And finally, the contrarian summary. This is the ultimate distillation. Force yourself to write one concise paragraph. If the fine print is right, then the popular story is wrong because.
That exercise forces you to decouple your understanding from the comfortable prevailing narrative and rely exclusively on verifiable documented facts. If you won't read the fine print today, you will eventually be governed by it.
Our first two examples deal with, high-stakes finance and technology, showing that this discipline of choosing hard information over comfortable entertainment is fundamentally about strategic leverage.
Right. But no story illustrates the true human stakes of this choice better than that of Frederick Douglass.
So we travel back to Baltimore in the early 1830s. Frederick Bailey, as he was known then, was a young boy running errands, and he found himself in the Auld household, where, for a very brief period, Sophia Auld, his master's wife, started teaching him the basics of the alphabet.
And that instruction was cut short by Hugh Auld, the master. This quiet domestic scene turns into a critical pivot point in history. Hugh Auld sternly interrupted the lesson, delivering what Douglas called a new and special revelation that he never forgot.
What did he say?
He essentially confessed the entire mechanism of control. Learning to read, Auld declared, would forever unfit him to be a slave.
Wow. That moment is so profound because the master accidentally told the slave the exact nature of the cage.
He gave him the key.
He did. Control wasn't just physical, it was informational. The system maintained itself by keeping the enslaved population uninformed, illiterate, and denying them the tools to name their condition or articulate a path toward freedom. Literacy was existential contraband.
And the information was a weapon in the hands of the oppressors. But Auld's outburst completely flipped the script. Douglas realized that if literacy was the one thing they feared, it was the one thing he must acquire. Sophia Auld stopped teaching, and surveillance began. Books became forbidden objects.
So Douglas, who can't just sit in a classroom, improvises. He turns the entire city of Baltimore into his own secret school.
It's amazing.
He executes his errands quickly, buying himself these little micro blocks of time minutes converted into lessons with the white neighborhood boys he meets outside. He had to acquire knowledge without getting caught, using stealth and strategy.
And this is where the genius of the bread trade emerges. He needed a currency for this illicit education. He noticed that bread was relatively abundant in the Auld household, but it was scarce for the hungry little urchins he'd encounter in the neighborhood.
So Douglas started carrying bread, not as a snack for himself,
But as strategy.
Picture the scene. A young boy, maybe on Philpott Street near the shipyard, engaging in a transaction that is more valuable than any currency exchange. He would give away bread, this small, immediate, daily pleasure, in return for the bread of knowledge. A letter, a word, a lesson in spelling or sentence structure.
It was brilliant attention arbitrage. He was redirecting a fleeting physical resource into a compounding intellectual asset.
Soon after that, he acquired the Columbian Orator, a foundational text that contained speeches, debates, and rhetoric on liberty and self-governance. And he read it over and over again.
Because repetition in this context isn't just redundancy. It's the necessary friction for forging a new mind. This acquisition gave him not just vocabulary, but the actual architectural tools of persuasion, logic, and argument.
And here's the profound contrast we need to think about. Entertainment, the immediate dulling of the edges, just passing the time, that would have been safer for him.
Much safer.
It would have kept him compliant and minimized his chances of brutal retribution. But information hard, awakening information, it made him restless, discontented, and full of righteous anger.
And that restless discontent was exactly what the system feared, because it's what leads to action.
Douglas's story is the ultimate proof of the principle. Information is leverage. The kind of leverage that fundamentally rearranges what you believe is possible about your own condition.
And we can draw a clear modern parallel. Entertainment primarily consumes attention and time. Information, the kind you have to wrestle with, the primary text, the difficult math, the complex philosophy, that kind of information builds attention. It builds focus, expands your vocabulary, introduces mental models, and sharpens your judgment.
We often treat entertainment as harmless background noise or maybe a reward, but it becomes toxic when it becomes the default setting for your attention, turning your spare mental cycles into this waiting room where nothing truly changes or compounds.
Right. Douglas strategically leveraged a small daily pleasure, food, into an asset, literacy, that led to his eventual freedom. The modern strategic move is to buy your attention back daily, because the world is constantly trying to rent it from you as comfort.
The knowledge he acquired, the ability to argue, to identify hypocrisy, to name the system, it made him profoundly harder to control.
As Hugh Auld knew, knowledge unfits a person to be a slave, whether that slavery is physical or informational, financial or strategic.
So let's discuss the modern bread trade. We have abundant intellectual bread, right? Infinite resources at our fingertips. How do we strategically swap daily comforts for compounding knowledge?
We have to be intentional about the swap. Identify one small entertainment habit. Maybe it's 15 minutes of aimless scrolling, listening to a gossip podcast, or watching short, punchy video reels. Swap that precise 15-minute block for an equal period of bread of knowledge.
What would that be?
That might be 15 minutes of a foundational text in your field, a research summary, or a long-form investigation. The discipline of the swap itself is what matters.
We should use what we're calling errand lessons. Do what Douglas did. Attach hard, focused reading to the in-between moments. Your commute, waiting rooms, standing in lines.
Keep the material queued up, the PDF, the chapter, the technical paper, so you don't default to the easy scroll. No perfect, quiet setup is required. Just ruthless consistency in redirecting your attention.
And critically, read what's hard, not what's loud. Once or twice a week, tackle a source that is explicitly not optimized for immediate dopamine, an original speech, a dense academic paper, a full industry report. This actively builds the muscle of deep concentration and resilience against tedium.
And finally, convert that effort into judgment with the one-sentence extract. After you wrestle with something challenging, force yourself to write one precise sentence. This changes my mind about Delayed because.
That act of distillation is how hard information becomes instantly usable judgment. Spend your easiest minutes buying back the attention that makes you harder to control.
So we've covered isolation for personal strategy and precision for financial advantage. Now we move into the organizational sphere.
Right, because if the culture itself punishes clarity, no amount of personal discipline can save a team or a company. The culture has to prioritize accuracy over comfort.
Exactly. Our sources take us to Dearborn, Michigan in 2006. Ford Motor Company is in crisis, hemorrhaging billions of dollars. Alan Mulally arrives, fresh from Boeing, and he immediately notices this deep internal danger. Leaders are performing confidence.
Performing confidence, what does that mean?
They were bringing theatrical performances to meetings, not problems, because the existing culture treated bad news like career treason. The internal climate was toxic. Executives had learned that the safest way to present was to polish everything green. If you brought bad news, you were not seen as a problem solver. You were seen as the cause of the problem.
So the internal status updates were basically just entertainment disguised as management.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
They were designed to soothe the CEO and the board rather than reflect the company's real trajectory.
Mulally needed to replace vibes with visibility. His tool was the Weekly Business Plan Review, or BPR. The mechanism was simple, almost brutally so. Every leader had to present their functional status using one of three colors: green, yellow, or red.
The goal was to enforce measurable, objective truth. But initially, as you noted, it was a total failure. For weeks, the slides remained overwhelmingly green, despite the company being on the verge of bankruptcy.
This wasn't optimism.
No, it was what sources termed organized camouflage. The culture was so deeply punitive that nobody dared risk the political cost of showing the reality of red. They were prioritizing internal comfort over collective clarity.
Mulally was confronted with this fundamental truth of organizations. You get what you reward. If you reward soothing status, you get theater. If you reward reality, you get action.
He couldn't just ask them to tell the truth. He had to change the entire system of accountability.
Which is why the critical pivot point came with a simple human gesture.
A clap?
The clap. Mark Fields, who was running the Americas operations at the time, broke ranks. He turned one slide red, flagging a serious production and launch issue with a key model. The room reportedly tightened instantly. Everyone was bracing for the public blame and the potential termination that such honesty usually provoked in the old regime.
And instead of blame, Mulally clapped.
He clapped.
He stood up and publicly thanked Fields for the transparency, emphasizing that finding a problem was a positive step towards solving it. He immediately shifted the focus from personal culpability to collective action, asking how the team can help. He signaled a new cultural rule in that single moment. Truth is not treason. Red is a coordinate for assistance, not a confession of failure.
Mulally's clap is the clearest lesson on information culture available. When leaders reward clarity, teams deliver reality. When leaders reward comfort, teams deliver theater.
And the biggest danger to any organization isn't the lack of data. It's a lack of usable truth data that gets massaged or delayed or buried because the political cost of accuracy is just too high.
The BPR meeting immediately shifted from entertainment, where status updates were engineered to stroke egos, to a transparent forum where reality was allowed to show up and be collectively managed. The transparency of the red status became the company's biggest asset.
To connect the systemic clarity back to customer knowledge, we can look at Scott Cook at Intuit, who applied a similar principle of forcing uncomfortable reality to be visible.
Okay.
Cook was building financial software like Quicken and TurboTax, and he realized his internal teams were confusing, talking about customers with actually knowing customers. Internal entertainment was easier. High-paid opinion, intense brainstorms, endless debates in conference rooms.
Cook pushed for a different route. Follow me home texting.
What is that?
This meant literally following customers home from the store to observe them in their native environment, using the software for the first time. This act replaces the comfortable certainty of assumptions with the useful discomfort of observation. You watch what people do, not what they claim they'll do.
And this is where the primary evidence reveals all the flaws. In the customer's home, everything the office couldn't see becomes painfully obvious. The moment they get stuck, the workarounds they invent, the massive leaps of faith they have to make, because the interface is confusing.
The insights aren't these dramatic revelations about the competition.
No, they are often small, humiliating embarrassments about your own product.
Cook's mantra was to look to be surprised. If you walk away from a customer observation session and you weren't surprised, you weren't observing, you were just confirming your existing biases.
The business principle is that primary evidence beats secondhand narrative. If you want to choose information over entertainment, choose the source that can embarrass you. The setting where your favorite internal story can be proven wrong in 10 minutes.
So the cultural strategy requires systemic fixes, not just personal habits.
Right. Mullally's fix was to define green, yellow, and red status so clearly based on objective metrics, like hitting launch timing or profitability targets, that the status couldn't be gamed. And then, crucially, publicly rewarding the first red. A green dashboard can truly be the most expensive fiction in your company if it's hiding the reality of a crisis.
And Cook's fix was a mandate for reality injection, demanding that the organization runs at least one Follow Me Home or a similar primary observation activity every month.
And when you report on it, capture behavior, they consistently click the wrong button, not opinions, they said they liked the interface. Bringing one screen recording or photo of a painful workaround to a meeting stops all the debate immediately.
The ultimate actionable step here, unifying both Ford and Intuit, is to introduce rigorous intellectual honesty. For every major organizational claim like our sales pipeline is robust or our customers value this feature, identify the hidden assumption and ask this single powerful question.
What would have to be true for this claim to be wrong?
That forces you away from comfortable narratives and toward the verifiable truth. If you won't force visibility, you'll end up managing a beautiful green fantasy.
This has been an incredible deep dive, hasn't it? Pulling these high-leverage lessons from Bill Gates's isolated reading, Burry's meticulous examination of toxic contracts,
Frederick Douglass's high-stakes barter for literacy, and the cultural shifts at Ford and Intuit that forced reality onto the executive table.
and the core lesson unifying all these strategies, from the Think Week to the Fine Print Hour, is that attention is the ultimate capital. You have to actively and consciously put it where it compounds knowledge and improves judgment.
You just can't outsource your foundational understanding to a summary or a pundit or a headline or some internal political narrative.
No, you can.
We saw 4 distinct commitments that are required: scheduling protected time for deep thinking, the mini Think Week, seeking out primary artifacts, the Fine Print Hour,
Leveraging those small, easily overlooked moments, the modern bread trade.
and forcing organizational honesty and visibility, that commitment to turning one secret thing red.
And this brings us right back to where we started, emphasizing the power of compounding knowledge. Warren Buffett once spoke about the thousands of pages of reports he reads annually. He said, reaching for his stack, read 500 pages like this every day. That's how knowledge works. It builds up like compound interest.
Knowledge upgrades judgment and makes you profoundly harder to manipulate or mislead.
And if you accept that premise, that deep, focused knowledge compounds, then the question isn't if you should schedule time for this, but why on earth you are choosing to delay the compounding.
Find your primary document today. That report, that contract, that foundational text everyone else skips, and dedicate 15 focused minutes to it.
Because if you don't schedule deep thinking, you will inevitably be scheduled by whatever's entertaining. And that is a cost you will eventually pay in late strategy, expensive mistakes, or lost leverage. Take the hard path toward clarity.